Welcome back to the Reid Report. It's now been 3 weeks since hundreds of young girls were kidnapped from their school in Nigeria. While it had been a foregone conclusion that the Islamist terrorist group Boko Haram was to blame for the abduction, this morning the group officially claimed responsibility for the mass kidnapping, threatening to sell the girls as slaves. As Nigeria's government comes under increasing scrutiny for not doing enough to find the missing girls, new reports say the country's First Lady, Patience Jonathan, is lashing out against leaders of last week's protest. According to the Associated Press, one of the women leading that demonstration was arrested and several others are missing. The First Lady is said to have, quote, expressed doubts that there was any kidnapping, accused them of belonging to the terrorist network, and of fabricating the abductions to give Nigeria's government and her husband, quote, a bad name. Meanwhile, over the weekend, President Goodluck Jonathan spoke out in his first on-camera interview since the kidnapping, asking for maximum cooperation from parents who he says, quote, have not been able to give police clear identity of the girls. The president also vowed everything is being done to bring them home.
We promise that wherever these girls are, we'll surely get them out. I have personally had a discussion with President Obama at least 2 times. In terms of U.S. and Nigeria discussion, we've been discussing from the beginning of these challenges, we've been talking.
As supporters gathered in D.C. to rally for the girls' safe return home over the weekend, Secretary of State John Kerry was in Africa on a previously scheduled trip and promised U.S. help.
Let me be clear. The kidnapping of hundreds of children by Boko Haram is an unconscionable crime, and we will do everything possible to support the Nigerian government to return these young women to
U.S. officials say aid could come in the form of intelligence help to fight Boko Haram, which is a terror network whose appetite for violence and bloodshed appears to be on the rise. And joining me now to discuss the controversy surrounding the search for these missing girls, Nigerian writer Lola Adesoye. And Lola, thank you so much for being here. I really want to talk to you today because of 2 parts of this. You wrote in a recent column for the Sunday Times the following. You said if this kind of mass abduction had taken place in the UK or anywhere else in the West, there is no doubt that it would be immediately have been considered an international crisis. And you also wrote that while Nigerians have come to expect a certain amount of ineptitude from the Nigerian government, in this kind of case, it's simply unacceptable. Address for me those 2 parts of this story, equally tragic. One, that this isn't sort of a bigger story around the world, and 2, the Nigerian government's own role in it.
Well, the first is that what it has taken to get to the point where people are now discussing this story in the way that we are today is really everyday people on Twitter saying, hold on a second, what's going on? Why isn't anyone talking about this? Why isn't anyone reporting it? Because obviously there was a story with the Malaysian Airlines flight that disappeared. Then there were the Korean children and the ship. And meanwhile, this other story came up and it was kind of floating around, but it wasn't really being taken very seriously. And it took some people using Facebook and Twitter to say, hold on a second, what about these girls? Yes, they might be in Nigeria. You know, maybe you don't know where they're from in particular, but isn't this as important as the Malaysia Airways story? Isn't this as important as the Korean story? Imagine if this had happened in America. Nearly 300 young women abducted from a school. I mean, it would be everywhere. So there's that aspect of it. When it comes to the government issue, the fact that it took the president nearly 3 weeks to speak out on something like this is absolutely disgraceful and unacceptable, really. And we're talking about young people, innocent people, women who've basically been driven off into the night to basically seemingly to be trafficked,
right? And
if they're alive at all.
And did it surprise you to hear, as it did me, the comments from President Goodluck Jonathan's wife, herself a woman, a mother, and her reaction to this abduction of these girls, to essentially blame it on the families and to sort of disparage the families? Was that surprising to you as an observer of the Nigerian first family?
It's not surprising in the way that to me, it seems like the president and his wife are not very good at taking responsibility. So, you know, she's saying that you know, they're trying to make Nigeria look bad, or they're trying to disparage the president. That to me just sounds like someone that can't accept the role of, you know, listen, you're here to lead, that's what people want, and it's not for you to start blaming anybody else. So I'm not surprised from that perspective, but what surprises me is the sort of lack of empathy, the insensitivity, and this sort of complete, you know, lack of urgency, this lackadaisical, like, oh yeah, we'll find them sometime.
Right.
That's shocking to me.
And talk a little bit about Boko Haram and what level of a threat they pose to the Nigerian government. How stable is this government? We know that since 2010 there have been about 2,300 deaths associated with Boko Haram's activities. Muslim-Christian clashes have resulted in about 1,500 deaths since that time. How much of a threat is Boko Haram to the stability of the Nigerian government?
Very threatening, because they are increasingly audacious. They're attacking civilians all over the place. They don't have a concern. And the thing is, they're a shadowy group. So, you know, we don't necessarily know exactly who they are. They're in different areas. They might be linked to Al-Qaeda. We don't really know how well funded they are, how much equipment and weapons they have, and that sort of thing. And the other thing is that at this particular point in time, Nigeria is growing in prominence on the international stage as a country that has, you know, the potential to be an economic powerhouse in the future. But the only way that can happen is if there's political stability. Now, the government itself has its issues with corruption and that kind of thing, but the threat of a militant group who are, you know, unscrupulous and can attack any time is not good for a country's either political stability or the economic stability, whereby you might want foreigners to come in and start businesses and that kind of thing. So they do pose a grave threat, and it just terrorizes the people as well, which is of course frightening. And
lastly, do we know the status of one of the protest leaders, one of the mothers who was reportedly arrested? Do we know if she is still being held, or do we know what her status is? I heard that she and someone else may have been released, but I can't verify that for sure, but that is what I heard. Well, Lola Adesoye, I mean, this is certainly a story that we've been following and that we'll continue to follow, and one that, as you said, is being driven a lot by social media, but hopefully we'll start to get more attention from traditional media as well. Lola Adesoye, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Jen. Thank you.
All right. Up